Hello, chicks and girls. You saw the title, so you know what's this video about. To be honest, I was certain that the answer was out there, but it was not. Recently, I was on a live stream and someone was curious about how to start The Witcher because they were confused about what to read first. And I always thought that the answer was clear. There were the books, the Netflix TV show, the video games, there were also some comic books, and yeah, I always thought that you should start with the first book, The Last Wish. And that's the answer, you start with The Last Wish. However, this will make a very short video, so if you're curious about where everything else in the Witcher franchise fits, stay tuned. So let's talk about The Witcher. The Witcher is a fantasy story, is a series of fantasy books by Andrzej Sapkowski. Here's The Last Wish, the book I would suggest you start with. It's one of my favorite books. I've read it 3 times, and it was written by this guy, well, who's Andrzej Sapkowski. He is a Polish author. I think he's an economist. He was living behind the Iron Curtain in the 80s in Poland, and his job was to go to outside the curtain to the US and Canada. He was selling furs or leather goods, I believe. But yes, he was one of the fortunate people in Eastern Europe that was able to go to Western Europe, because in case you are too young to remember the 80s and the 70s and the 60s and the 50s, Eastern Europe was under a communist regime, and there was less access to things from the Western world, and it was very hard to get books. However, he was able to travel abroad, so this gave him the opportunity to get a lot of fantasy books in English and read them. And at some point in 1987, there was a contest to write a science fiction story for a local magazine, and that's how he wrote The Witcher. And this is how Geralt of Rivia was born. The stories he wrote for Geralt are collected in this book, The Last Wish, as well as his next book, The Sword of Destiny. And I didn't pick every book of the series to here, so trust me, it's back there. It's actually there. He wrote all those short stories and actually managed to collect them under a narrative that connected them. And then he wrote 5 novels. The Blood of the Elves is the first one of the Witcher novels, and there is a shift in the novels. It's less about Geralt of Rivia and more about Ciri, his adopted daughter. So yeah, you should definitely start with The Last Wish if you want to start chronologically. You should definitely not start with the Polish TV show from the early 2000s. And this is how I started with The Witcher. And here is somewhere we'll go about The Witcher and the Witcher franchise, because technically it's 4 very different iterations, and each of them is popular in its own way, I guess. Alright, yes, the TV show is one of them and it's not popular. But let's talk about what sets the Witcher novels apart from other fantasy books. The Witcher saga is postmodern fantasy. Sure, Andrzej Sapkowski was very influenced by English-speaking fantasy writers. He was definitely influenced by Tolkien. There is a lot of the Michael Moorcock postmodernism. I mean, Geralt is like a blue-collar Elric of Melibone. He is white hair, has 2 swords, a special sword in his back. No, I don't think it's in his back, but never mind. He has a 4-piece sidekick in Dandelion, and a lot of the way he's writing, he's subverting fairy tales and fantasy cliches. I mean, yes, just read The Last Wish. It's fairy tales reinvented and in interesting ways, like, the Beauty and the Beast. I think that the original The Witcher is a version of the Sleeping Beauty, where the Sleeping Beauty is a cannibalistic monster, a striga, an undead monster. The story The Last Wish is a good play on Aladdin and jeans and Yeah, I mean, there is even in the sort of Destiny, I believe, a dragon hunt who is based both on The Hobbit and on a Polish fairy tale. So yeah, that's quite an interesting one. There's an interesting take, and of course there is a lot of Terry Pratchett in these books. A lot of Terry Pratchett humor, with anachronisms and satire of the modern era through the fantasy world. There's a lot of socio-economic and political discussions in it. There are mentions of racism, of pogroms, of religious fanatics, which is quite interesting. There is also this tendency that Sapkowski has to tell parts of the story through documents or narrations of other people, which intensifies the postmodern take on the fantasy genre. He even wrote some amazing battles where the villains were not stupid cannon fodder going to die by the heroes. They actually act on their own, which is very interesting. The action in The Witcher reminds me a lot of Sergio Leone westerns, where there is a lot of talking, a lot of tension building, and then an explosion of action. And that makes The Witcher, again, very interesting. And of course, there is a lot of Fritz Lieber's Langmar books, which are quintessential sword and sorcery. There is the humor, the dark magicians, the everything. Really, The Witcher is very fascinating. Also, The Witcher is very slim on world building, believe it or not. There is a lot of things mentioned there. There's a lot of things insinuated in the books, but there's not much solid world building, which leaves to the other adaptations of it take their own turn on it. And believe me when I say about the Polish TV show from 2000, yeah, that was quite different. It altered a lot of the Witcher mythos. It had a lot of changes to the setting and nature of Witchers, and even the character of Geralt. The book Geralt is much more of an anti-hero, more brooding, more sentimental. He's basically a living biological weapon who wants to be human. That's the main core of Geralt in the books. In the TV show, he is some sort of a special Witcher who has feelings because other Witchers have these mutations, make them feelingless, and he's more human, and he cannot keep it in his pants. The TV show is very low budget. I like the casting of it. It makes the best out of some of the stories, which was very interesting. It's a bit lagging. It's very low budget. It's an interesting take. It's entertaining, but not very good. What is very good, however, are the video games. I mean, most of the people in the West know the Witcher saga because of the video games, alright? And they're really good. They're really good. I think they're the best part of the Witcher franchise. They're very different, though. In some ways, the video games, the Witcher games, are more like an unofficial sequel to the books, because during the first video game, the first The Witcher, we learned the end of the books in the first 30 minutes or so. However, they're not a strict sequel. The world is somewhat different. Geralt is, of course, very different. In the games, he's much more of a traditional hero. He's very sarcastic, less brooding, more action-oriented. He takes the aspect of Geralt cannot keep it in his pants from the TV show to 11 with the saga cards. I mean, okay, the book Geralt had his misadventures, right? But he was mostly doing that because he was confused, he felt very emotional, or it was just because the genre did that. Here, especially in the first game, it was taken to an extent that was a mini game, and the creators took a lot of flack for it, but here they were just Polish geeks making the first game. And in a way, I think that this aspect, the saga card aspect, was a nice comment on, on the romance option of other RPGs of the time, when you have to talk hours and hours and hours with a person, or, give them gifts. You find the world like in Dragon Age, and maybe have, this soft-core late-night TV sex scene there. In The Witcher, it was like, let's bang. It was kind of interesting in this world because the video game Witcher world is a hellscape where monsters exist in droves in every square mile of the map, and you can basically die if you go alone outside. And by the third game they really went back on this aspect, which was good. But what really makes the games interesting, apart from taking some references and inspiration and Easter eggs from the books, as I said, they're not exactly a one-to-one translation. For instance, there is one minor character in the books who dies a few scenes after they first appear, and in one of the games they are one of the major characters. So that means it's not a very strict sequel. It's more like a sequel inspired by the books and the world they have in. And they have a ton of references and side characters and references to the books. And you know what? If you have read the books and then you play the games, you get the most out of it, because you realize some of the references here and there and see how things connect. And it's quite fun. So start with the books, then go to the games. Also, the games are much more different. They're less postmodern. They're more straightforward action tales. They have this very interesting take on morality, where you have to make some decisions that are not clear-cut, they're not black and white, they're much more amoral, and they are their own thing. It's a very interesting take on chaos theory, when you have Geralt, who is just, he's just a sellsword, nobody, a pariah, who has to change the future of kingdoms through the choices you make as Geralt, which was very interesting take on the fantasy genre of the Chosen One. Geralt is not the Chosen One. He's just a guy who happened to be there, and he was capable enough to deal with the situation. The Chosen Ones in the story, the Chosen One is Ciri, his daughter, and even in Wild Hunt, where Ciri is the Chosen One, and that's something taken from the books. It's all about Geralt and his choices and how they affect the Chosen One. It's really a great take, and actually goes against the books, where the theme of destiny is very important. But what the games have kept is the humor of the books. Of course, there's a lot of more quipping compared to the books. Geralt is a different character, but there's a lot of anachronism, a lot of satire, a lot of commentary on various themes that are universal, the political, social, ecological, that also exist in the books. And they're very willing to also subvert a lot of the tropes in fantasy and fairy tales and such. So the games are a spiritual successor, an official sequel to the books. As far as I know, Andrzej Sapkowski has also written a book called A Season of Storms, which is set somewhere in the book series, I believe between Sword of Destiny and Blood of the Elves. However, he's going Michael Moorcock and adding more stories, and I think he's going to write a sequel to the Witcher books, even though the way the Witcher books end, it's pretty final. There's a clear ending to the series and the story of Geralt, but then again, it's money. So I hope he does a better job than Michael Moorcock and his Eric novels, which I'm also reviewing at this time, and you can check the videos. What about the Netflix show? The Netflix show is an adaptation of Last Wish and Sword of Destiny, and I believe maybe there's part of Blood of the Elves in this one. Season 2 will definitely be based on Blood of the Elves. It's somewhat close to books in the story aspect and the world building of it, and quite faithful, I'd say. Of course, there are some more scenes with Yennefer and her adventures. We're not in the books because Yennefer is a side character there. But I believe they do a great job on the characters and the world of the novels and the themes of the books. It's quite interesting. I think that if they continue to the end of the series, it will be less postmodern. Maybe they will have, I don't know, 3 or 4 seasons, I believe. Because, yes, the novels they're sort of decompressed with all those postmodern aspects of it. And you can tie them up in a more traditional narrative by conjoining books and by, making them fit a series. And there will be an ending, I guess. A clear ending compared to, Game of Thrones or something. And yeah, it's very Game of Thronesy. There are politics, there is violence and sex, and lots of characters. So yeah, what one can ask about it. Now, about the comics, because in the live stream I was in, the question was, should I read the comics first or the books? The comics are a different thing. There are 6 issues of Witcher comics that were made in 93 to 95 in Poland, which are not available in the West as far as I know. So the comics are definitely... Yeah, there is a 2011 Egmont book. It's a European comic called Reasons of State. I think it was included in the Witcher 2 bonus material. I think that's how I read it. I'm not sure though. It may have been in GOG or something. Polish? Oh, it's a Polish comic novel. It's a Polish comic book. And there's another comic book that is called Matter of Conscience in 2015. And then there are 3 graphic novels from Dark Horse, which are written by Paul Tobin. They're illustrated by Joe Querio. And all those comics I've mentioned, they're based on the video game, not the books. So they're sort of based on the world of The Witcher. Actually, I loved the first 2 Dark Horse comic books, House of Glass and Fox Children. They read a lot like side quests from the video game. Fox Children is actually based on one of the chapters of Sapkowski's Season of Storms. I have not read this novel yet, so excuse me, but I wasn't aware of that. But yes, House of Glass, Fox Children, Curse of Crows, they're based on the video game world of Geralt and his interpretation of Geralt. And actually there are 6 Dark Horse comic books. There are 3 more published since 2019. There is Of Less and Flame by Alexandra Motika and Mariana Strykowska on the artwork. There is also Fading Memories and Witch's Lament. They're both written by Bartosz Stibor, and the artwork is by Amand Mir on Fading Memories, and on Vanessa Del Rey on Witch's Lament. So that means I have to go to my local comic store and get them because I was unaware of them, but this happens, But yes, my main point is that the Dark Horse series is based on the video games or the books. So that's it. You read the comics after you play the books, after you play the games, and you get a lot of it actually. So yeah, you should definitely read The Last Wish. You should ignore the Polish show, even though that's how I started in the Witcher franchise myself. You play the games, you watch the Netflix adaptation, and you read the comic books after you play the games. That's the order you should do that if you want to go deep into the Witcher saga. But of course, you can start in any place. Each of those interpretations of The Witcher is a different world. There are differences. They're not strict. There is not a clear timeline of you should do this, this, and this. However, you'll get a lot of spoilers from the games if you haven't watched the show or read the books. And the comics are just, you can read them at any moment. They're a great way to go into The Witcher without needing a lot of background details. They're standalone and they affect nothing. So yeah, that was my video about The Witcher. For some reason, when I make these videos about how to read this, in which order should I read this and this and this, it's supposed to be very simple to do that. However, they diverge into some behemoths of videos. I don't know how long this is. The footage for this video is 25 minutes. Probably it will tighten during the editing of this video, but it's already too long. So thank you for watching, and both are for monsters.